Jim Turr, and I am interviewing 4 people I know who have spent a lot of time in Cuba. And I'm going to put this together in different lengths and different formats, but I wanted to get this first full interview out now before we get into a Venezuela situation with Cuba. I want to get this perspective out.
Well, I think it all started, my interest in Latin America all started when we formed the first ethnic studies program in the United States back in Oakland, at the Peralta Community College system. We formed the first ethnic studies program in the United States in 1968. And so we started doing a lot of research on U.S., Mexico, U.S., Cuba, U.S., Latin American relations, and just about the Cuban Revolution had just occurred in 1959, and so it was a concern for everybody, and primarily the people that had heavy business interests in Cuba. Well, the revolution, the Cuban Revolution, happened in 1959, and it drove out Fulgencio Batista, the Cuban dictator at the time, and then as a result of that, Cuba came to the United States asking the United States for aid, help us to develop. Mm-hmm. The United States says, we will help you if it's a certain kind of development. It cannot be independent national development. It cannot be. Certain things, you don't touch United Fruit Company, you don't touch this company. They had business interests. They had $50 million invested in Cuba before the revolution. Well, we started developing the curriculum because we started the department from a global perspective. We're Chicanos, we're Mexicans, we're Latinos, and we're affiliated with the rest of the Latin family all over. We're part of that process too. If you talk about the invasion of Mexico here. Cuba became the spotlight of U.S. Latin American relations at that time. And since they could not develop independently, Cuba said, we don't want a capitalist system. We want a system where we can share everything. No one can own the means of production. So that always kind of appealed to me. And so they declared themselves to be socialists. They never have achieved socialism yet. They say that to us. We got so far the pressures from the blockade. I mean, a 65-year-old blockade. How can a small country like Cuba, 10, 11 million people, 10 million, it's gotten smaller since this last crisis. How could a country that small be of any competition to the United States? And not too long ago, the Pentagon, we did some research on the Pentagon says Cuba does not have any physical, any economic or military threat to the United States or any of its neighbors. Well, any country that professes any kind of socialism has taken Marxist ideas. For example, free universal health care is a Marxist concept. Free educational system is a Marxist concept. Free housing is a Marxist concept. Does that mean we're communists? Does that mean Sweden is a communist country? Norway is a communist? Germany? France? No. It just means that those have been concessions that have been given to people because of the needs of the people. They have demanded it, and Okay, they granted them that. But the means of production are still in the hands of private individuals. By the way, nationalization of foreign properties is absolutely legal under international law. But you have to compensate the property that has been nationalized. Well, and Cuba said, we're going to nationalize United Fruit Company, all the agricultural stuff that you have here. They were negotiating with the United States government. And it was the playground for the world, but the United States, 30,000 prostitutes in Havana. It was like, it was wild. Havana was wild. So they nationalized all this stuff with a promise to compensate, and if the that was negotiable. The compensation for nationalized property is negotiable. The United States would not negotiate. So they said no, and they profess a communist government, and they took away our property, and they're going to be beating at the shores of the United States, the southern border, and do you remember movies like Red Dawn? Do you remember that? It was made here in Las Vegas. A Cuban invasion of the United States. You know, it's ridiculous. But that's all the propaganda, the anti-communism. It became systematic. All you say is Cuba is communist. Oh, they're enemies, and they're not even socialists. Anyway, so that started the ball rolling. The presence of the Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State, and he was very virulent anti-communist. His brother Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA and was also a lawyer for the United Fruit Company. So there's all kinds of connections there. You know? They had something like the United States had something like $50 million invested in Cuba. Well, from there, then the pressure starts. Kennedy severs relations with Cuba. And from that point on, they began to restrict trade. And by the way, the United States still adheres to the Platt Amendment, which was a result of the Treaty of Paris in 1898 when the United States invaded, helped the Cubans take the Spaniards, evict Spaniards out of Cuba. The Platt Amendment, which is part of the Treaty of Paris, says that the United States has the right to intervene in Cuba, in any affairs of Cuba, if it deems necessary. And that's when they got Guantanamo Air Base, and a few other concessions, no commercial treaties, all of that. They wanted to control. That's why they don't like independent national development. They want to be on top of control of everything. So there's been assassinations. There's been a couple of dozen attempts at Fidel Castro's life. There were bombings of hotels to try and ruin tourism and all that. Well, the sanctions began to tighten. Any investment, for example, there were 7 airplanes, airliners that Cuba had, small airliners, that stopped in a certain place around Latin America. They were confiscated by the United States. They're confiscated because this would help pay for all the nationalized property that Cuba had taken over. Right? Well, that's kind of a dubious way of giving yourself compensation for something. The Helms-Burton Act is a treaty prohibiting foreigners from doing any business with companies that were previously owned by the United States. Then the Torricelli bill that was passed a few years later limits the any foreign vessel that lands in Cuba will have to wait 6 months before it comes and does any business with the United States. Well, if you have a small country, the United States is the biggest trading partner for most of Latin America. Well, those two are still in effect, right? And they've been applied. In addition to penalties to invest in Cuba, blockading, for example, blockading humanitarian aid. I went on one of those trips with Pastors for Peace to break the blockade, and we took humanitarian aid, medical. We sent baseball equipment. We sent all kinds of stuff to Cuba, and a lot of humanitarian aid. And we went through Texas, and when we got to the border, we're on the U.S. side, and we were parked alongside the road, and they said, okay, there were about maybe 15 truckloads of stuff, sometimes smaller trucks, some ambulance. We loaded everything with it. They had us take, the customs had us take everything out of the trucks, pile them up, and provide the manifest for what we were taking in the hot Texas sun. There we were taking shit out. Taking stuff out. And we had taken out, and they saw all the manifest and everything. The officer said, okay, you can go. So how did it take us to load that stuff back on, right? And then we traveled from there to Tampico, where we loaded it onto Cuban ocean vessels, freight vessels, and they took it to Cuba. That's just an example of what others did, and they were also stopped at the border.
Yeah.
Then the other thing that many communities here in the United States decided, why don't we have some people-to-people diplomacy? And we joined the U.S. Sister City Association, where a community here would be paired up with a Cuban community. And we said, we want to be a sister city. So Las Vegas, then with a resolution from the city council, became a sister city with Banes, Cuba, and southern Cuba in the state of Holguín. And so we started having a relationship with Cuba. We took humanitarian aid down there. We went and we also recruited kids from the United States. I recruited 5 from New Mexico to go to the Latin American School of Medicine, which had been authorized as legal by the American Medical Association as having a similar or compatible medical training center. So far, we have graduated about 300 U.S. kids that are back in the United States. They received free scholarships to become doctors. $400,000 to become a doctor nowadays. We graduated about 300, and with only one requirement, that when they finish their school, they would come back and work in an underserved community. It's the only requirement. One of our first trips during the special period, early 1990s, they put on travel restrictions and trade restrictions, so that the Cubans had a hard time getting any materials to run their energy, their power plants. So they were having blackouts. I went during that time. by the way, I've been to Cuba maybe 20 times. And during that visit, the special period, when there was a similar blockade to the one that's happening now. So we were standing in front of the hotel on that visit, and here comes a guy on a bicycle. He has a briefcase in the back, and the people in the hotel stopped talking to him. I said, "Who's that?" Oh, he said, "That's the Minister of Economics. He's riding his bike to work. Stopped by the hotel to say hello to the guys." And I got to meet the Secretary of State, and I got to meet, and by chance, I got to meet Fidel. I had a short conversation with Fidel Castro. We went to a small conference at one of the schools of social work in Havana. And we're going to talk to the directors about how they did social work and all that. But then there was a surprise. Fidel was going to be there. So everybody said, Fidel. So we all got into this auditorium, small auditorium, and we sat down. There was a railing here. We had a table. And from here to that wall, Fidel comes in and sits down right there, right, with 3 or 4 aides and translators. And the conference lasted for about 3 hours, where he spoke to people, answered questions and all that. On the way out, I stood up by the railing, and Georgina got over there on the side with the camera, and he's walking on, and I put my hand out, and Fidel grabbed it. And then I said to him, queremos darle las gracias a Cuba por su bondad en las becas para los niños de medicina. Muy bondadosos, ustedes son muy bondadosos. Y también las gracias por todo lo que han hecho por todos los países del mundo. Por ejemplo, han llevado más médicos a los pobres países del mundo que las Naciones Unidas enteras. Es increíble que un país tan pequeño y subdesarrollado como Cuba dicen que tienen su preocupación más grande es la humanidad. I said, we want to thank you for for what you have done for the students in the Latin American School of Medicine, and we also want to thank you for all the work that you've done around the world. It requires a lot of bravery. And he said, on the contrary, he said, you're the brave ones. You have to live there. We have to live in the United States. You have to live there. So that's the lesson that I've learned from being in Cuba that many times. They are involved with contributing to humanity. And so that your listeners might understand, they have produced they have sent more doctors to the poor countries of the world than the entire United Nations put together. One incident to show you what they've done. We were going down there to visit the school, and some of our students, actually we take a delegation down every year for Thanksgiving, to be with the to the U.S. students for Thanksgiving. They've graduated 25,000 doctors from Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, and 300 kids from the United States. And they're all home practicing medicine for free, educated for free. Right. Free scholarships. So my students were in the process of taking finals. That's what I was going to say. And just then, the Haitian earthquake and hurricane hit and killed thousands of people, destroyed Port-au-Prince and a bunch of communities. The Cubans were the first ones out there. They said, we'll send our doctors to help the Haitians. So our kids from New Mexico said, I want to go. We'll postpone our exams, our final exams, and come back. Whenever we come back, then we'll take them. So they were there for 4 or 5 months. In Haiti, they built 4 or 5 field hospitals and sent hundreds of doctors, not 3 or 4 or 5 or 10, hundreds of doctors, and they took care of the Haitians, and then they recruited Haitians to come to the Latin American School of Medicine. So they're still there. They're studying. El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, a bunch of them send doctors, train their doctors in Cuba. They go back to their home countries. The medical establishments there don't like them because they don't charge any money. They want to charge money. Oh, we're talking about Guatemala.
I see.
El Salvador, those countries. Okay. They don't like the Cuban doctors. They're Cuban-trained doctors. The people do, but the business interest, because many of those countries have health is a for-profit business, like we have here. So we were in Havana, downtown Havana, in old Havana. Got a taxi to go home. We're going through a blackout district, and in the middle of the street there were people there waving their hands, stop, stop. And so there's 3 of us in the cab, and the taxi driver rolls down his window, and he says, "We have a sick child. We think he's very sick. We need to send him to the hospital." He says to us, "I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave the cab. There'll be another cab here shortly. I have to take these people." They took the kid, put him in the cab with about 3 or 4 people, and dashed off to the hospital. I said, would they do that for me in New York City? I would. Doubt anybody would stop for you in the middle of the street and say, "Hey, take me because I have an emergency." Where's that going to happen? Well, there's a million acts of kindness from one Cuban to another, to another, and they said, "Oh, I know who's got this for you that you could use," and I give him something. I gave him some stuff that I had taken for sister cities, and it was some kind of material that they wanted, and pretty soon I saw it in a store. They made something else. I forget what it was. They made something else out, but they told me that they were going to do that. And if you buy something in Cuba, Cuban stuff is dirt cheap. You buy something in a store, it's dirt cheap. They made stuff and they were using it in a store. I said, "This is amazing. They know how to do something out of nothing." I met guys I met a mechanic once that asked, what specialty are you? He said, "I put brakes on cars." I said, "You must have a lot of trouble getting parts from." He said, "No. I just look and see what kind of brakes they have, and I manufacture them. I make them." I said, "Can you make brake linings for Mercedes?" "No problem." "How about a Bentley?" He said, "No problem." He said, "I can make," and he said, and something like 95% of all those old cars that they have in Cuba are still running. Yeah. So it's just an example to show you how they impromptu and manage to do something out of nothing. Another incident that I had was went to a institution they call campamentos, and these are farming co-ops, and a lot of Americans go there to help out too. You know, they send the Venceremos Brigade. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. The Venceremos Brigade would go to the campamentos to help them build this and that, and in this the campamento that I went to, they picked us all up at lunchtime and took us to the mess hall. So we all sat there, we washed our hands, we had a great lunch, and I sat there right with the workers and talked to this woman who was a farm worker there. What are you going to do? What's going to happen when Fidel dies? And she said, yo soy católica y soy socialista. Y todos los días le ruego a Dios que deje a Fidel vivir para siempre. I am a Catholic and I am a socialist, and every day I pray to God that he let Fidel live forever. I said, everywhere I went, I mean, I saw Fidel speak maybe 5 times, sometimes in a program that lasted, where he spoke for 5 hours. Nobody left. Nobody left the place. I mean, everybody, you can walk out if you want to. You could just leave if you want. You don't have to stay. Yeah? Fidel never, every time I saw him or heard him, in conferences, he never had any notes. And his teachers used to say, don't give Fidel anything that an examination question that has to do with a book, because he has a photographic memory. He'd go through the book like this, page 67, and everything would stick in his mind. And I mean, he remembered everything. He would say in his speeches, he would never use any kind of rhetoric. He would never say, you imperialist United States. He would say, the actions of the United States have caused this, this, and this, and made us miss these objectives. We had these objectives with this production, but we could not get this. And he'd tell them what the issues were, what the problems were, and how they were trying to overcome the problems. Well, I don't think it can be different. I don't think it can be different because, number one, the United States started out its history with aspiring to be an empire. And Cuba was one of them, one of the first ones. It's the one that said that Cuba would be a great asset and a great annexation for the federal government, for the federal integrity of the United States. There were others. There were the Monroe Doctrine, all those doctrine after doctrine saying the United States has the right to control, and they have controlled the economies of every Latin American country. And now, any country that tries to leave the sphere of influence of the United States or has alternative plans for, like Mexico now, with Sonia Sotomayor, the new president of Mexico, who says she's a socialist. And they said, we'll no longer sell our oil. We'll only use our oil for national consumption. That means all that oil that Pemex has, the Mexican oil company has, is going to be stay in Mexico. It ain't going to be here. It's not like, and we're not going to take advantage of that Mexican oil because they didn't have refineries. Now Mexico has their own refineries, so they can use their own. They can make their own gas and all that. We're an expanding empire. That's what we've been. You can look from the start of the country to now, and we even say we're an empire. I've heard government people say that we're an empire. We don't have to adhere to the same rules that international law says, and you know, Trump says the same thing. He's at the peak of that. He is not the guy that runs the show. It's the corporate banking system of the United States, Wall Street, that makes the decisions, the policy decisions, and the economic decisions for the United States of America, and the politicians are just the players. Right? So that's what I've learned in my 88 years, that it's not Trump isn't the problem. It's the Federal Reserve, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, these huge banks that tell the government what they want. And the policies are determined. I mean, I've read all kinds of conferences that the brokers for the corporate banking system have with the politicians. They even interview the corporate banking class interviews every single candidate they think is viable for them. They interview them. They have long sessions, weeks. They invite them to retreats to question see if they're going to be, if their thinking is in line with the corporate banking class. Important political positions. The presidency, the presidency is always one of them. Secretary of State is another one. And if they're willing to play ball with the corporate banking class, then they say, okay, we'll fund you, because they're in charge of campaign financing, right? Who's going to spend $3 billion to run for the presidency? Who has $3 billion to run for the presidency? Then there's the political parties, yeah, and you get they're all in the bag of the look. What's his name? The so-called Cubans, Ted. What's his name? Cruz from Texas, Rubio, Menendez from Florida. All these guys, they were there. When it comes to Cuba, but they also see the resources there. See, they'd love to have the Cuban beaches. They'd love to have all those wonderful hotels. There are parts of Havana. Have you been to Havana? There's parts. Havana used to be the focal point for the slave trade in the Americas, all over the Caribbean and all over the Americas. So there's incredible wealth there. Sugar, everything went through Havana. And there's avenues of just these gorgeous houses that are built block after block after block. But that's where the wealthy lived, right? So it's you can see the manifestation. You can see the manifestation of why the United States wants what they're doing now with Cuba, the same as the wealth of Venezuela, oil in Venezuela. Right? They have resources. We want them, and besides, you're not being obedient. I would say that Cuba is the most progressive country that I've been in. The most progressive in terms of fulfilling the basic needs of people. They say that the health and education, the two pedestals of any society, they have to be guaranteed to every single individual. Health, education, and housing. I said, wow, we would never do that. Health, education, and housing? Well, but we have the tools to conduct the embargo. Huh? We have the weaponry. And it's amazing that they've been able to stand all this, because they have overflights, by U.S. spy planes, vessels going in U.S. and Cuban waters. I mean, they violate that all the time. They've done study after study. The Cubans keep trucking. They keep moving along. My buddy Arnold just came back 2 weeks ago. He says the Cubans say, we got to tighten our belts a little bit more. We've been through all this before many times. So they've got guts, right? They've got guts. People before profits. That's an important thing for me. And the needs of the people come first. The needs of the people. And when you see a need, when you see people, I've seen the people in this particular district in Cuba, they complained about the water in some of their old beautiful buildings. The Cubans, with the people, made a plan on how to redevelop their neighborhoods. The people themselves were the people that told them what they wanted and how they would do it. So it was democratic, is what I'm saying, right? Their electoral system is just like the French electoral system. We don't say the French are communists. It's the same electoral system. But because we think that socialism and capitalism are deadly enemies. Look, in 65 years, we have the most powerful military economic nation in the history of the world blockading you if you're a small country anywhere. How long would you last? They've lasted 65 years. They keep tightening their belt at every turn, and they're saying, and some of them are leaving because that's the policy now. We want to make them feel the pain, like Stephen Miller says about the other immigrants, to the point where they want to overthrow their government or leave. And they ain't going anywhere.
Bueno.
But one more thing. What I am fearful of is that a violent presidency and the Trump people will want to bomb Cuba to teach them who's boss. And they better surrender and obey from now on, or else it's going to mean worse.